one of the things that Adam Lane Smith has said before is that we really had, after World War II, an entire generation of traumatized men coming home. And many of them found it very difficult to attach to their children. And so he charts a lot of the problems that have happened generationally to that sort of original trauma. And I certainly saw this with my grandfather and people that went off to war. They just didn't talk about what they went through. Imagine going through the most traumatic experience of your life for years at a time at a very influential stage in your development and then refusing to talk about it for the rest of your life in any kind of meaningful way. The fact is that level of repression is going to have certain impacts. And one of those is often a lack of attachment. It can come out as anger, it can come out in a lot of unhealthy relational dynamics. The children raised by these men had a certain response towards fatherhood that was less than ideal as well. And so one of the things that Zuby starts to ask is, well, what do you do in this situation? I mean, it seems like you could have a traumatized generation, then traumatizing the next generation. And that this is just going to get worse and worse and worse until you just have an entire society of deeply unhealthy people where nobody even remembers what health looks like. And I love how Adam Lane Smith talks about this. And his answer is quite theological and I think and biblical. And I'd love to interact with it here.
Oh, yes. Oh, I love this. Thank you for bringing this up. I could take a stab at it because this has been my obsession. I'm on a personal quest to teach 1 billion people about secure attachment because if I could teach a billion, then that jumpstarts the process. Now, I wish I could claim that I invented this. I did not invent attachment theory. I wish I could claim that people will only get better if I teach them. Well, I hope that, but that's not the case. Nature heals, right? When a population is going through an ongoing stressor, they don't get better. But when we end that stressor and when we correct at least the environment where, okay, the stressor is gone, the beautiful thing about populations is that they start healing. In the Bible, it talks about when a curse will follow a generation down three generations out. That's what we seem to see is the dad has overwhelming extreme traumas from something, or his dad makes a horrifying decision that shatters the family. The next generation is screwed up. They're screaming, they're hitting each other, there's substance use, it's catastrophic. The next generation usually says, and here's an amazing thing a lot of humans do, I will at least be better than my parents, at least a little bit. And they pick one or two things they won't do, and they do a little bit better. The next generation says, I will do at least a little better than my parents. And they pick one or two things they won't do. And as they resolve down through the generations, eventually, provided that stressor is gone and that they have a little bit of time to heal, they reach a point where they are good, healthy, connected families again. And this idea of secure attachment and resolving conflict, all it is having the guts to talk to each other and trust that the other person is at least going to hear you out and care enough to work with you in a mutually fulfilling kind of way. That's all. People won't exploit me. At least my family will listen to me and we will try to work together toward a common good in a sustainable way. That's it. And humans reach that. Once we get broken and we start fixing again, we reach that equilibrium again. My goal is to speed that process up for a billion people across the earth and transmit that knowledge and say, look, here's what you were missing. Instead of waiting another 2 generations, here's your information now. Here's what to start doing. Let's jumpstart your process. But to do that, we need a lot of the stressors taken off of our relationships and our life. We need families to be encouraged to stay together again instead of encouraged to break up. We need risk factors and massive drug epidemics to go down so that people aren't dying in massive, overwhelming numbers. We need violent gangs who are intruding across in various nations across the earth and all kinds of war. We need to at least slow down so that populations can heal a little bit and be safe inside and play in a park. And then when families can play in a park, they can bond. And then they can spend that time pushing on the swings, playing, running, throwing a ball. Then they can bond with each other and build intra family networks, kith and kin networks, and build neighborhoods again.
Okay. So yeah, it's interesting the way he was ending that, really like kind of this Edenic picture of like being in a garden. And this is kind of like the way that human beings are really designed to interact. And this is what creates for ultimately healthy families where there's not constant stressors that create the kind of detachment that he's concerned about. But he's really kind of making an argument about the way that this happens across generations that I found really interesting, which is that in the Bible it says that when a generation decides to rebel against God, its impact really reverberates to the third and fourth generation. And his point there is that nature tends to heal. In other words, there's an equilibrium or there's a way in which we were really designed to interact with each other. There's a loving kind of connection that is sort of natural to human beings. If you take away the stressors, then we tend toward back towards a place of more healthy relating. Now, I would say that those stressors never can be completely eliminated. We live in a time on this side of the garden, even if you were not to have the massive stressors of a world war that we're sending men off to fight and die and be traumatized in, you still have so much happening. And he's describing a lot of those dynamics there at the end. He says, this, we got to take these stressors off. But one of the natures of the fall is that if you just give in to sin and to sinful patterns or sinful beliefs, those are going to bring stressors into your life. I mean, this is exactly what sin is. It's the decision to rebel against the natural way that God made the world in such a way that it's going to violate relationships, either relationships with other humans or with God himself. And that when you do this, it creates a generational cost that the next generation bears a cost. And that one of the most beautiful things that can ever happen in a multi generational family is when one father and mother stand up and say, we're going to stop this in our generation. We're going to become more healthy. We're going to stay together for life. We're going to work things out. We're going to learn how to do healthy conflict. We're going to worship the Lord, and we're going to bring our family underneath the lordship of Christ. We're going to learn from scripture the way that God designed family, and we're going to follow that biblical blueprint, and we're going to experience a lot of the positive elements. And this is the whole ethos of, we want our ceiling to be our children's floor, and that we can heal from these 3 or 4 generational kind of patterns that happen. But I think one of the things that's really hard for people to totally accept is that you are often in the middle of one of these patterns. In other words, you are one of these 3 or 4 generations that you can't necessarily recover everything in your generation. Maybe there was just too much going on from the perspective of the kinds of challenges that you're facing, the kind of patterns that you face. You can overcome a lot of those things, pass a much better result to your children, who can then do the same for your grandchildren. And this is why when you start to think about family as a multi-generational project, as opposed to a one generational project, you start to have the stamina for what actual progress looks like. And when you redefine all of reality as success is always an individual game, that we're playing a single player game, this really bleeds all the motivation out of the multi generational project of saying, look, if my grandchildren have a substantially better life than I grew up with, then that is success. I can look at that and say, I have really done my part in helping to heal the world. And I think that's a very beautiful idea, and one that we should embrace. And likewise, if you are looking at your children and grandchildren and saying, if I make these decisions, their life is going to be worse than mine was, that I'm going to take the privileges and advantages my parents gave me, and I'm going to give less of those to my children, who are then going to give less of those to my grandchildren, then I don't care what kind of amazing things you're a part of, the kind of activism you're participating in. You are making the world a worse place. You are taking the world that you were given and you are corrupting it for the next generation. And this is the way I think we need to just kind of honestly assess what progress looks like. And I think an obsession over our individual life, our individual story, oftentimes leads people to make the kinds of decisions that put a greater burden on the next generation participating in this process of healing that he's describing.